Hello and welcome to another episode of Acceptable Madness, where my name is Scott McKinney. I'm not a doctor, but I still talk about things related to mental health. This episode is going to be about emotional outlets, which is something that I've never actually talked about too much. I've mentioned how important it is to have an emotional outlet, but I was talking to Alex the other day, and it occurred to me that I'd never really, I encourage it, but I didn't know how I discovered how important an emotional outlet was for me to keep going and have better mental health. And so I want to explore how I came to that realization, even though I didn't know I was coming to that realization in the moment. So one thing that I do a lot is I like to write. I mentioned that on here a lot. I like to do all of my creative hobbies. But back at the end, I graduated from college in December of 2017. And after that, it was a very stressful time, as I'm sure it is for many of you, or was for many of you, and will be for many of you. And because it's the first time you're going out into the real world and becoming like an actual adult, instead of hoping that you have all these real world responsibilities whenever you live with your parents, you're finally thrust into it. And it's really something that the only way that you can prepare for it is by going through the life experiences of going through it. But for me, I was always terrified of having to go through it. And especially, I mean, it wouldn't be completely on my own because I have a good support system, but me going through it, it's still my own life. And so it's kind of me going through it on my own because it's just what's happening to me. For some people, it's already happened, and for others, not yet. So they won't be able to fully understand the struggle and the anxiety that can come from it. And so in December of 2017, I was having a very, very, very hard time mentally. The stress of having to dive into the real world and get a job and pay bills and try to do all that while maintaining family and friend relationships, like a relationship with a significant other, and then also trying to find a way to truly be happy, even though most of my day is just going to be eaten up by sleep and work. And it was a really hard time for me. And in the moment, as my suicidal thoughts and all of those depressive thoughts peaked and they started to become way, way stronger and more prevalent because I was just terrified of the real world. And it made me think that maybe the best thing to do would be to just not face it at all, which is clearly not the right answer. But it was a thought that went through my head, and that was a really scary time. And at that point, I had already written my first book. And I was proud of the fact that I had written it, even though it wasn't very good. But I loved the actual process of writing it. It felt really, really gratifying to write a story about a character that's completely my own. And so after I finished my first book, I wasn't ready to start writing another book. But what I did instead was I focused a lot more on writing short stories, or I don't even know if they're called short stories, because I have some stuff that I've written more recently that's like 25 pages and like tens of thousands of words. But the stuff that I was writing was anywhere between like 300 to 500 words. And so they were like really quick thoughts. And the content in some of these shorts were, I would write about how I was feeling in that given moment, or I would take some element of what was going through my head and put it to words and try to understand it a little bit better. And other times I felt like I had to write something and just put it down on paper. Otherwise, I didn't think I would ever get over it. And that led to me writing a lot of things. One of the very first things I wrote was called Hamster in a Cage. And it's a short. It's probably no more than like 200 words. And what it's about is that feeling of running in place and being in that hamster wheel and always going through the same stuff. And it was this hamster. It was in the perspective of this hamster that was envious of its owner because the owner wasn't stuck in a cage, but the hamster was being a little bit. It was mistaken a little bit because as it's explaining how boring and repetitious its own life is by going to sleep, waking up, eating, drinking, staying in the confines of its own space, and then running on a wheel, because that's basically all you can do in a more basic hamster cage. It was this hamster thinking about its human and its owner, and how they have it so much luckier, because when they wake up, they go to bed and they wake up and then they eat, and then they get to leave the cage that is their house. But what the hamster was kind of ignoring and not considering was the fact that humans and hamsters have very similar life. It's just at a different scale. So hamsters are stuck in a cage all the time doing the same repetitious tasks. And people, especially adults after they graduate college, they have the exact same thing. It's not like it's, yes, you can go and do these kind of extravagant things like traveling, or you're able to get out of your house and spend money on like a hobby or go mini golfing or something like that. Like there are so many things that you can do outside, but it's still the same kind of routine. And so this hamster was very mistaken, thinking that its owner had the most glorious life ever, when really it's not very different from theirs. And one of the other things that I wrote was called The Step. And it was basically just from the perspective of someone who was debating jumping off a bridge and killing himself. And the end of the story is them falling and hitting the ground. So it's a very, very dark story. And that one's really short as well. But whenever I wrote these things, they made me feel happier and more comfortable with the world around me. So writing about the hamster, it made me realize that everybody's kind of stuck in the confines of this world, and they can get stuck in a rut, and it's really hard to get out of it. And that life it has a lot of limitations because you can only do so much. And that made me feel comfortable, because I didn't feel like I was this lone person ready to attack the world. I felt like I was a member of a grander thing, like a civilization, and that everybody's going through the same stuff. And that for me to go out and get jobs and do all the same kind of stuff, knowing that everybody else was doing the same thing, comforted me a little bit. And then ever since I wrote Hamster in a Cage, I still stress out because I don't like the idea of 75% of your day going to sleep and work. So I still hate that. It's a really unfortunate system that we have, but you can only do so much about it. But it made me feel more comfortable because I wasn't going it alone. And for The Step, this might sound counterintuitive, but I wrote that because I was having a lot of very aggressive suicidal thoughts, and I needed to write it down. And once I wrote down The Step about this person who, for all intents and purposes, it was myself, jumping off the bridge, the act of doing it in a story helped put into perspective how much I didn't want to do that in the real world. And I was able to kind of live through that experience through my writing and realize that there's more to life than just struggling and then committing suicide. And that made me feel better. One of the other things that I've written it was called Harpoon Gun. And it was about these constant thoughts that I had literally every night for like an entire year before I was falling asleep, about taking a harpoon gun, putting a noose around my neck, and shooting the harpoon gun straight up into the air to see what would happen scientifically. If it would like rip my head off, or like strangle me, or if it would hang me because the rope and the harpoon were shot at a strong enough force to like land wherever it's being shot. So if it's shot at the rafters, then will it stay there, and then will I be dragged with it? And I mean, obviously there's a lot of question there, and it may not be the most scientific thing I've ever written, which I have no problem with, but it was just the contemplation and thinking about what could actually happen if I did that. And after I wrote that down, I've never really thought about killing myself through a harpoon gun noose again, just because I was able to put it down. And as I'm writing it, I'm thinking about it. And it's something that has really helped me move past some of the very, very negative thoughts that I have. I still have suicidal thoughts basically every day, and sometimes it does not take a lot to get there. So someone cuts me off in traffic sometimes, and I'm just like, wow, I wish I was dead. And instead of saying it like jokingly, I mean it very seriously. But I would still never act on it. But it's important to know that those thoughts are still there, and they're not going to totally evaporate just because I've written something down. And after years of me doing, I wrote over 100 of these really short blurbs. Some of them are really, in my opinion, really good. Some of them are absolute dog shit, if I'm being totally honest. And but I'm okay with that because I can go back and I can read through some of this writing that I'm not necessarily in love with, because my writing skill has improved so much over the past years. And but I'm able to go and see these thoughts and what I was thinking whenever I was putting them down. And that helps keep my mind clear of all these thoughts that I still sometimes have going through my head. And it's a really, really rewarding experience, because not only do I know that I've created something, being the short that I'd be referring to, but it's also a way that I have found to kind of put my emotions out there, whether it's just for me or whether I share it with someone. It's a way for me to just put my emotions out there, and it really helps. And I've tried, it's kind of like journaling or like having a diary that you maintain all the time, because that's literally you taking your thoughts and putting them to paper, but in a much more literal sense, I feel like, most of the time. So if you feel like you're stuck in a rut, then you're going to write, well, I feel like I'm stuck in a rut. But for me, it's not as straightforward as that. I don't find that to be fun or helpful, although if that works for you, then great. But I have always thought that maybe it would be better for me to do like a characterization of something else, or like personifying an object or something like that. Finding a way to do it in a creative way where it's not so forced down the reader, but instead they might be able to make their own thoughts and observations about what I've written. And maybe it'll be something completely 100% what I was trying to write. Or maybe it'll be something else that's more in line with what kind of struggles they're going through at that moment. And it might be enough that it can really, really help people figure out what's going on in their head and try to make the best of it. So I didn't realize as I was writing these things, though, that I was using them as an emotional outlet until much farther after. Because, like, I knew that I was doing it because I had this, I felt compelled to. Like, I basically could not resist writing some of these thoughts, and I don't know what caused it, but it was wild for me. I just felt like I needed to write it. And this weird, like, obsession with having to write something related to my mental health was such a different change of pace from what I was used to doing in the past. Because in the past, I would have potentially just bottled up whatever feeling I had and never think about it again. Or when I do think about it, I still refuse to share it with people because I don't feel that it's something worth talking about. Because I don't want to be a burden on someone, or I don't want to I don't want to bug someone, or there are so many reasons that you might bottle up your emotions. Maybe you don't think people care. Maybe you don't want people to care. Maybe, I know I can be incredibly prideful sometimes, and sometimes I don't necessarily love telling people about my problems because it makes me feel very vulnerable, which I'm okay with vulnerability most times, but I don't want to completely, like, turn the conversation into a hostage of my own complaining and struggles throughout the day, whenever the conversation could instead be something of a much more positive tone. And so having this emotional outlet allowed me to understand my own feelings better, even though I didn't even know that that's why I was doing it. It helped me to understand them, and it also helped me put them in a place where if someone really wanted to understand what was going through my head, they could read my writing as opposed to asking me how it's going. And I like when people ask how I'm doing, and I like asking other people because I always want people to be doing as well as possible. But it was still just such a unique thing for me because no one else in my family really does that. And I think it's really cool because being able to put your stuff down, it kind of like takes those thoughts and just gets them out of your head. But the other thing is you can kind of immortalize it in some way. And I think that can be really helpful too, because writing it down and dealing with it could help keep that thought or that struggle that you've been through and how you dealt with it. It can keep all of that fresh in your mind. So whenever something similar comes up, you're ready to deal with it better. So for example, if I have this thought and I'm thinking about jumping off a bridge to kill myself, then I'll go back and read this step. And even though it's dark, and even though the person in that story kills themselves, it just helps to show, like, really the perspective of it, because he kills himself and he wasn't able to make amends with the people that he's talked to. He's not able to enjoy the life as he knows it. Even if he's not enjoying it, he's not really allowing himself to continue enjoying it, because he's opted for a very different outcome. And so it's something that, having it somewhere that I can think about it and help process those thoughts, has allowed me to better understand what's going through my head, and also has helped me understand what could possibly be going through other people's heads too. Because I know that I have all of these things that I've written, but I know everybody's mind is completely different. And so even though I'm going to talk about, or I'm going to write about the step and someone killing themselves, that may be the exact opposite of what someone has or wants to deal with or wants to read whenever they're in a really bad place, because that could be like poking the bear. If someone's thinking about suicide and they read that short, then that might be enough for them to actually commit, which no one should do. But that's like a fear that I actually have with my writing, is I'm worried that because it's a little bit darker in nature, that it might cause someone to perform an act of self-harm. And that always terrifies me. The bright side is I haven't put anything out there, like, writing-wise, other than on my blog and some social media, but it's still something that whenever I do inevitably self-publish all of these shorts, which are hopefully will come up in the next few months, that to me will be a huge test of the meaning and the effort behind all of these things, and like pouring my heart out onto a piece of paper. And I'm unbelievably excited for it. And I'm so glad that I accidentally stumbled upon a really good emotional outlet, and that it's actually helped me find and discover more about who Scott McKinney is, and what he could be doing to make himself happier, and what he could do to make the world a better place, and how he can help other people. And I think that's the coolest and the most, like, serene feeling, because for once, after all these years of feeling like since 8th grade, and I was going through puberty and I started getting all these suicidal thoughts, because that's basically when it started for me. For the first time, I can think about all these negative thoughts that I've had, and I can put them to something that's more productive. And even if I never self-publish this, and even if no one ever reads it, it's still a way just to make me a little bit happier by putting them out there. And because of that, even if no one's reading it and no one's being personally impacted by the stuff that I'm writing, it'll still cause me to be a more understanding, genuine, and emotionally vulnerable person. And I think that will help me, and has helped me already in a lot of different ways, because since I've started writing, I'm a lot less terrified of commitment and having and maintaining good relationships with my friends, family, and girlfriend. For the longest time, I was always like, I always viewed myself as this expendable friend. Like, no matter which friend group you're in, and you'll have many friend groups, you're always the one, or how I felt was I was always the one that if I stopped showing up, no one would miss a beat. Like, no one would think like, oh, where's Scott at? Or everybody would be like, fucking finally, he's gone. But instead, and truthfully, a lot of that thought could have been because I was distancing myself from them myself, or it could have been just because I didn't understand how much of an asshole I could be sometimes. But writing all this stuff has helped lead to a better understanding of both of those things, that I was a massive asshole, and I still have asshole-ish tendencies sometimes, and that I sometimes tried to distance myself from other people, and truthfully, I tried to not care about anybody or not listen to how they were feeling or what's been going on with them, all because I was too scared to cope with it myself. Because not everybody can afford a therapist or feels like therapy is necessarily the best decision for them, but everybody needs a friend that can be there for them to help them out in the tough times that they encounter, whether it's something as I was going to say simple, but it's not simple, like getting your first apartment outside of college, or dealing with someone who's gotten laid off from a job, I mean, that was me recently, but there are other people that have gotten laid off as well, and they have to bounce back in some way or another. And that's something that in the past, before I started writing and found these emotional outlets, then I may have just been like, oh, you got laid off. I don't know how to deal with this at all. I really don't want to talk about this, or like just walk away. And clearly that's not what the person going through that traumatic thing wants to hear. Because everybody wants to, if you're going to communicate with someone, I feel like you want that to be a genuine relationship. I have a lot of friends. We're all in the same friend group. We all went to the same high school, and we rekindled that friend group. It was actually with Danny and Trevor, so two of the guests I've had on here. And this group it's all jokes. It's all talking about like video games and a group message, and we all just like mess with each other and jokingly insult each other about different stuff. And it's just the relationship that we have. We're all really good friends, and we're comfortable doing that without actually offending each other. But when push comes to shove, if the conversation needs to turn to something much more serious, say death of a loved one, something with like a relationship, like you're going through a tough breakup, or you are worried about having to move to a new area, or you're worried about all these things, that conversation can change from jokes to something more real and genuine. Not to say that the other conversations aren't genuine, but something that's probably much more needed in that moment. So it's cool to have that, and to be able to understand that, okay, well, I feel better when I put my stuff down in writing, or whatever other outlets may be out there. Some people make music that can really explain or show how they're feeling. Some people just like talking about it. Some people like myself, I like comparing it to other things or just blatantly writing it out. There are so many things that everybody can do, and once you find that thing that makes you feel better about everything, about life, about how your brain works, and how it'll make your relationships and all of those conversations a little bit better. So even whenever they are joking, you can feel that stronger connection with the people that you're talking to, and that feeling of they're only hanging out with me because they feel bad, or like I don't belong in this group. I'm an outcast. I could leave at any given moment. All of those thoughts, whenever you allow yourself to be vulnerable and the friendship is maintained, that's when this friendship of jokes and shits and giggles turns into jokes, shits and giggles, and genuine feeling. Like, I really hope all of my friends, I hope they all have really good lives, and I'm excited to hear about what's going on with them. I'm at the age where a lot of my friends are starting to get into more serious relationships, and that counts some of my family too. And I can't wait to hopefully go to their wedding if I'm invited, which would be cool, or even do so many other things that I'm excited to be a part of all of my friends and family's lives now. In the past, it was all about Scott all the time, like my career, my hobbies, my athleticism, my sleep schedule, my food. It was all about me. And that's probably not a surprise, because I actually was talking to my friends the other week, and they're constantly surprised that I can do podcasts where it's just like half an hour of me basically talking to myself, because I'm just playing off of my own thoughts as opposed to like interviewing someone. And so they're always kind of constantly mesmerized that I can do this, but it's just, I like talking, and that's another way that I have an emotional outlet. But being part of all these lives, now that I can step back and not care so much about myself for a second, I still care about myself, and I still know that dealing with depression and anxiety and any other mental illness that you may encounter, you need to treat it with the respect and care that it needs. But once you get it a little bit under wraps, once you're able to find an emotional outlet that really helps you, then you're not always stuck on it. So like, I have depression, and I know that that's going to be around until the day I die, a natural death, hopefully of old age. But so I know it's going to be there, which it sucks. But at the same time, it's once you hit a point where you understand the relationship between that thought process and your life, it'll let you look at life in a very different color. It changes from black and white and a monochromatic theme to like rainbows and colors that you've never seen. because you're able to look at it from the perspective of someone that really cares and someone that's genuinely excited for all the people in their lives, as opposed to just doing it so that you have people around you that you can complain to or that you can talk about yourself with. Because I do think talking about yourself is a very important thing, because if you don't, because there's definitely two sides of this coin, because you want to have an emotional outlet and you want to have these good relationships with people. But if you never talk about yourself, then that's like pseudo good relationships, because everybody has interesting things going on. And I hope for everybody that your friends care about what's going on with you too. I have two friends, Kyle and Nikos, and then Alex and myself. There was one day last week where I called Alex, and I'd written a thing called Fleeting Romance, which, spoiler alert, I made a joke that I had this like mistress, basically. It was like 500 words or something. What it was about is I went to the gym, and when I came out, I sat on a bench because it was a really nice day, and a lightning bug landed on me. And I didn't knock it off or anything. I just let it kind of crawl over me. And it started up my shoe, and my legs were crossed, and it crawled all the way up to my shoulder before it flew away. And so I wrote about how important love and relationships and affection is. And then I ended by saying that it was this lightning bug that I feel that I miss because it flew away. And it was so dumb. But I read it to Alex, because sometimes I like to read the stuff that I'm really excited about to people. And I read it to Alex, and she immediately was like, let's call Kyle. And so I called Kyle, and we merged the call. So it's the three of us talking. And it was a great time. And I read Kyle the story, and he got a good kick out of it too. And then we talked for a little bit, and I try to keep up with most of my friends as well as I can. But after that, we decided that because we are all mutual friends with Nikos, who was my old roommate, we called him and added him to the call too. And so it was the four of us talking over the phone, in each of us in a different state. Because I'm in Pennsylvania, Nikos is in Virginia, Kyle is in Texas, and Alex is currently in Ohio. So we're all talking, and it was such a good time, and I was excited to hear about what was going on with everybody, and how their jobs are, and what kind of things they have to look forward to, and what kind of workload they have, and I even talked about myself too. And although I didn't talk as much about my career, because it's, the job that I have right now, it works and it pays the bills and stuff, and I don't hate it, but I personally don't feel like there's too much to say about it. But I was still able to like tell them about what's been going on with my life too. And so everybody was kind of up to speed with everybody else. And it was just fun. But if I had just called and talked about myself the entire time, then I walk away knowing no more about the people that I was just talking to. And I would walk away with basically the same emptiness that I went into the call with, because I can talk about myself all I want, basically within my own head. Like I'm always thinking, so I can think about all that stuff. And if it's important enough to tell someone, then that's one thing. But if it's just talking for the sake of talking, then that's another. But all of these things have been spawned simply because I discovered the emotional outlets that help me feel like a better, happier person. It's allowed me to maintain a good relationship with my girlfriend. It's allowed me to turn that relationship with my parents from they're simply my like disciplinary figures, as the traditional mom and dad in America are most times. And I've been able to transition to we're all adults and we can have adult conversations and talk about real adult things. And it's cool having that relationship with your parents for the first time, because I was a little bit of a little bitchy in high school and in college, especially because that was a really hard time for me. And now that I'm out of it, and now that I have better control over my thoughts, it's incredibly exciting to me to go and just spend time with my parents and not be upset about that. And it's allowed me to get rid of all these like walls that I put up because I don't want to be vulnerable. And it's let me let trusted, nice people in and let me share my life with them, even though I do have I do have a hard time handling the vulnerability of who I am. But it's allowed me to bring people in, and that's given me a better sense of trust and community with the people that I talk to. So I feel like I can go and talk to them, and all of a sudden we could be going from making poop jokes, because I'm like 12, to making genuine conversation about jobs and what's going on in everybody else's life, including myself. And just having that freedom and discovering that freedom was one of the most amazing things that has ever happened to me, and has grown me as a person way more than a lot of other things. And it all happened because I found a way to take my depression and think about it more and understand it. It all happened because I found something to make me feel a little bit better. And it's such a massive, like, domino effect. I never would have thought that writing a 200 or 300 word short story thing about suicide would allow me to have a better relationship with the people I care about. If you were to tell me that that's what would happen, I would not believe you 2 years ago or 3 years ago. And I'm sure it even sounds a bit ridiculous hearing from me that that's exactly how it happened, because that is such a bizarre transition. Like, I went from suicidal thoughts to better relationships, and I skipped the step where I actually commit to something dangerous and deadly. I can't stress enough how important it is to find what makes you happy in some way or another. Because depression, anxiety, they're sons of bitches. Just flat out. They suck. And man, if I could take all of everybody else's pain and put it on myself, I would. Because I think I can handle it okay. But I can't do that. So the best I can do is just try to help people understand how it's possible to get past these fears of vulnerability and putting yourself out there. And just understanding the world around you and really trying to understand the people around you as well. The world can be a brutal place. It can be mean. It could be an asshole. It could take your career and money away. You can have a turkey fly into your windshield. There are so many terrible things, but if you can make a few small changes to help understand what's going through your head, all of a sudden those thoughts about that turkey flying into your windshield, they change from, this is the end of the world, I could have died, I can't believe this just happened to me, why me, couldn't it have happened to someone else? It changes all of those thoughts away from that negative perspective where it's kind of like blaming yourself or blaming the world, and putting it into, well, the life is just this endless mix of coincidences and luck or bad luck, and it's just this constant stream of disappointment or happiness or whatever. But if you can find a way to take all those negative emotions and deal with them better, then all of those negative things, or all those things that happen that you blame yourself for or blame the world around you, and if you can stop doing that, then when something as trivial as a turkey flying into your windshield happens, then you won't see it as the end of the world. You'll be much more likely to see it as just the ebb and flow of life, and something that you have to deal with and get past because you have to keep moving forward. Finding an emotional outlet is unbelievably helpful. And I can't believe it took me this long to talk about it, or to really understand how important it was for me to find them. So the best I can say is find whatever makes you feel happier. Because happiness is really, really important. And you should never have to be subjected to something that makes you unhappy. And you should never feel like you have to be in a situation where you are unhappy. You just need to find what works for you. And you need to find how you can kick life's ass and take it in stride. So, thank you for listening. This is a really important episode to me, because I think that this, along with a good sleep schedule and good, taking care of yourself in other ways. I think this is one of the best things that you can do to stay happy, or at least make that journey into sustained happiness, if that makes sense. So thank you again, and I will talk to all of you next week. Bye.